grand ballroom of the celestial spire shimmered like a captured nebula, its vaulted ceiling woven from living crystal that pulsed with soft, starlight hues. Below, the air hummed with the low thrum of antigrav platforms and the rustle of silk woven from comet tails. I, Joran, stood near a towering archway draped in luminous moon vines, nursing a goblet of fizzy nectar that tasted suspiciously like fermented stardust. My boots, scuffed, practical, and utterly out of place among the polished obsidian floors, felt like anchors. I'd only been invited because my engineering team had jury-rigged the palace's atmospheric stabilizers after a rogue solar flare nearly turned the royal gardens into a vacuum chamber. Honestly, I expected a medal, maybe a voucher for synth steak, not a front-row seat to the most absurd spectacle in the trigalactic Concord, the royal wedding program of Queen Lyra of Viridia. Couldn't help it. A snort escaped me, then a chuckle, then full-blown laughter that earned me several withering glances from dignitaries draped in iridescent scales or floating in personal force fields. On the massive holoscreen dominating the far wall, the program scrolled, Processional of the Lumina Choir, Presentation of the Starlight Scepter, the choosing of the consort by Her Radiant Majesty, the choosing, Viridia's ancient, bizarre tradition where the newly crowned queen, after a year of mourning her predecessor, publicly selected her life partner from a pre-approved list of galactic nobles, diplomats, and obscenely wealthy oligarchs. It was pure political theater, a gilded cage disguised as romance. The candidates listed were names that made my teeth ache. Lord Theron of the Platinum Asteroids, Ambassador Vex of the Silicon Spheres, Prince Kalen of the Azure Dominion, each more polished, powerful, and painfully perfect than the last. My laughter wasn't just amusement. It was the desperate guffaw of a grease monkey who'd accidentally wandered onto a stage meant for gods. I pictured Queen Lyra, a figure I'd only seen in stern, regal portraits, pointing a perfectly manicured, three-fingered hand at one of these glittering peacocks, sealing an alliance that would probably involve tax breaks for asteroid mining. The sheer, ridiculous pomp of it all, the idea that love or compatibility mattered less than trade routes and fleet deployments, struck me as the funniest thing since I'd accidentally programmed a sanitation droid to recite epic poetry. My mirth died instantly, choked off like a faulty plasma conduit. The holoscreen flickered, the scrolling names vanishing. Instead, the image resolved into the queen herself, standing alone on the dais at the room's heart. Queen Lyra. She wasn't just regal in person. She was other. Her skin was the vibrant, life-rich green of Viridian jungle canopies after rain, smooth and flawless. Her hair, cascading past her waist like spun moonlight, was pure luminous white, framing a face of sharp, elegant angles and large, almond-shaped eyes the color of molten gold. She wore armor, not ceremonial robes, sleek, segmented plates of polished emerald that seemed to drink the light, etched with swirling patterns that glowed faintly silver. Elf-like ears, pointed and delicate, twitched almost imperceptibly. She looked less like a bride and more like a warrior queen who just stepped off a battlefield, her posture radiating a tension that vibrated through the suddenly silent hall. Every whisper, every rustle ceased. The air grew thick, charged. My own heartbeat hammered against my ribs, loud enough, I feared, for the entire room to hear. Why was she looking here? Her golden gaze swept the crowd, not lingering on the preening nobles near the front, but scanning the periphery, the shadows near the archways. It passed over me once, a fleeting glance that sent an electric jolt down my spine, then stopped, returned, locked onto mine. Time didn't just slow, it shattered. The opulent ballroom, the glittering guests, the very air, it all receded into a blurry, silent backdrop. There was only her eyes, ancient and knowing, holding mine with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her face, not amusement, not disdain, but a profound, weary determination. Maybe even a spark of recognition? My brain short-circuited. Me? Joran? The guy whose best suit was patched thermal weave? The one who'd just been laughing at her sacred ritual like a drunken spacer? Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I must have misread it. A trick of the light. A malfunction in the palace's mood-sensing ambience system. I ducked my head, staring intently at the swirling patterns in my nectar, willing myself to become invisible, to sink through the obsidian floor into the maintenance tunnels below where I belonged. But the silence deepened, becoming oppressive, expectant. A low murmur began to ripple through the crowd, confused, then disbelieving, then sharpening into outrage. I risked a glance up, Queen Lyra was descending the dais steps, not towards the line of stunned, pre-approved suitors, but directly towards the archway where I stood frozen, my goblet forgotten, dripping nectar onto the priceless floor. Her emerald armor whispered against the stone. The crowd parted before her like water before a blade, their expressions a kaleidoscope of shock, fury, and utter bewilderment. Lord Theron's face had turned the color of spoiled synth milk. Ambassador Vex's crystalline form seemed to dim. Prince Kalen looked ready to draw a ceremonial plasma dagger. My own knees felt like they were made of gelatin. What in the nine hells was happening? Had the solar flare fried her brain too? Was this some elaborate, cruel joke? My mind raced through 1,000 catastrophic possibilities, each more humiliating than the last. Maybe she needed a disposable consort for a dangerous political maneuver? Maybe she'd mistaken me for someone else? Though who, in this sea of perfection, looked remotely like me? Or worse, was this punishment for my ill-timed laughter? She stopped a mere arm's length away. Up close, she was even more breathtaking and more terrifying. The scent of ozone and something wild, like crushed viridian night blooms, clung to her. Her golden eyes searched my face, not with the detached assessment of a monarch, but with a startling vulnerability that clashed violently with her formidable presence. "Joran," she said. Her voice wasn't the booming proclamation I expected. It was low, clear, and carried an undercurrent of exhaustion that resonated deep within my own bones. Just my name. No title. No flourish. It hit me like a physical blow. She knew my name. How? The palace records listed me as Lead Atmospheric Systems Technician, Temporary Contract. Not Joran. Never Joran. Before I could stammer a response, before the furious nobles could surge forward, she did the unthinkable. She reached out, her long, graceful fingers, tipped with nails like polished jade, closing firmly around my wrist. Her touch was cool, but the grip was iron. "You," she declared, her voice gaining strength, ringing out across the stunned silence, "are my choice." Chaos erupted. It wasn't just noise. It was a physical wave of disbelief and fury. Lord Theron bellowed, "This is an outrage, a farce." Ambassador Vex emitted a high-pitched shriek that made the crystal ceiling vibrate. Prince Kalen drew his ceremonial dagger, its blade humming to life with a crackle of blue energy. "The tradition is sacred," he snarled, taking a step forward. "She is compromised. Seize the human." Palace guards in silver livery moved instantly, forming a protective cordon around us, their energy staves raised. But the real threat wasn't the guards or the outraged nobles. It was the look in Lyra's eyes as she turned to face the dais again, pulling me with her. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by a steely resolve that promised storms. "The choosing is complete," she stated, her voice cutting through the din like a vibroblade. "By ancient law, it is binding. Joran of Terra stands as my consort." She didn't look at me as she said it, her gaze fixed on the seething crowd, but her grip on my wrist tightened almost imperceptibly, a silent plea for me not to bolt. My mind was a whirlwind of terror, confusion, and a traitorous, absurd flicker of something else, the memory of her eyes locking onto mine, that moment of impossible connection amidst the absurdity. This wasn't just a wedding. It felt like the first move in a war I hadn't signed up for. The days that followed were a disorienting blur of silk, protocol, and sheer, unadulterated panic. I was whisked away from the ballroom not to a dungeon, but to the consort's wing, a suite so vast and opulent it made the ballroom look like a storage closet. Walls shimmered with embedded constellations, furniture floated on silent repulsors, and the bathing pool was filled with warm, glowing liquid that smelled like spring rain. Servants silent, multi-limbed beings with iridescent skin, appeared and vanished, bringing food I couldn't pronounce and clothes that felt like woven air. But luxury couldn't mask the underlying tension. Whispers followed me everywhere. Guards watched me with suspicion, not protection. Every reflection in the polished walls showed a man hopelessly out of place, his practical spacer's frame swallowed by flowing viridian silks the color of deep forests. And Queen Lyra, she was a ghost. I saw her only during formal state functions, a distant, regal figure on her throne, exchanging pleasantries with diplomats while her eyes, when they occasionally met mine across the vast hall, held that same unreadable mix of exhaustion and fierce determination. The connection I'd felt in the ballroom seemed buried under layers of duty and danger. The truth, when it finally came, wasn't delivered in a grand audience chamber. but in the dead of the Viridian night, in the shadowed corner of the palace's highest observatory, I'd escaped the suffocating luxury of my suite, seeking the familiar comfort of the stars, the one thing that felt real. I was tracing the familiar patterns of Orion when her voice, softer than I'd ever heard it, broke the silence. "They call it the choosing," Lyra said, stepping from the shadows near a massive telescope. She wore simple, dark green robes now, her white hair loose around her shoulders, the emerald armor gone. She looked younger, infinitely more tired. "But it's never been a choice about love. It's always been about survival." She moved closer, her golden eyes reflecting the starlight. "My predecessor, Queen Selene, my sister, she was poisoned. Not by an external enemy, but from within the court. The same factions who stand to lose power if Viridia aligns with the Terran coalition instead of the Dominion or the Spheres." She gestured towards the city sprawling below, its lights like scattered jewels. "The pre-approved suitors? They are the faces of those factions. Choosing any of them would be signing my own death warrant or worse, binding Viridia to their corrupt agendas. They expected me to play the game." She turned fully to me, her expression raw. "I saw you laughing, Joran. Not at the spectacle, but at the lie of it. You saw through the gilded cage. In that moment, you were the only honest thing in that entire room." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "And your work on the stabilizers, it wasn't just technical skill. You rerouted the core matrix using principles from ancient Terran fluid dynamics, something no Viridian engineer would consider. You think differently. You see solutions where others see only protocol." She took a deep breath, the weight of her confession hanging heavy in the air. "I chose you because you are unknown, unpredictable, because you have no ties to the Vipers in my court. And because—" She hesitated, a flicker of vulnerability returning. "Because in your eyes, for that 1 second, I didn't see a queen. I saw a possibility, a chance to break the cycle." She stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her green skin. "But this is not a fairy tale, Joran. Choosing you has painted a target on both our backs. They will not accept this. They will try to remove you, or me, or both." Her words landed like ice water. The absurdity of the royal wedding program was replaced by the chilling reality of assassination plots and political coups. My laughter felt like a lifetime ago, a naive relic of a simpler time. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now tangled with something else, a fierce, protective anger. This incredible, burdened woman had gambled everything on a stranger because she saw honesty in his laugh. She'd chosen chaos over a gilded death. How could I, Joran the engineer, the fixer of broken things, walk away from that? "What do you need me to do?" I asked, my voice rougher than intended. The question surprised even me. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't a politician. I fixed machines. Lyra's eyes lit up, not with royal command, but with something akin to hope. "I need you to be Joran," she said simply. "The man who sees the hidden connections, who finds the unconventional solution. The court expects a consort to be ornamental, silent, easily controlled. They don't expect an engineer." A genuine, weary smile finally reached her eyes. "And I need someone I can trust to watch my back while I navigate the front. Someone who might just laugh when things get too grim." The unspoken promise hung between us, not of romance. Not yet, but of partnership forged in the crucible of shared danger. The absurdity hadn't vanished. It had just transformed into something far more dangerous and far more real. The first attack came not with fanfare, but with insidious silence. 3 days later, during a routine inspection of the palace's primary power nexus, a task I'd requested, needing to feel useful, to understand the machine that was my new prison, the lights didn't just flicker. They died. Not just in the nexus, but across the entire western quadrant of the spire. Emergency klaxons wailed, casting the cavernous chamber in pulsing red light. My engineering instincts kicked in before the fear could fully register. "Sabotage," I muttered, already moving towards the main control console, my fingers flying over the interface. The diagnostics were scrambled, the core regulators offline. This wasn't a random failure. It was precise, targeted, designed to cripple life support and security in the Queen's private quarters. Panic threatened to rise, but Lyra's words echoed, "Be Joran." While Viridian technicians scrambled, confused by the alien logic of the sabotage, I bypassed the corrupted protocols, rerouting auxiliary power through secondary conduits I'd mapped during my stabilizer work. Sweat stung my eyes as I worked, the red emergency lights painting Lyra's face in stark, dramatic shadows as she appeared at the entrance, flanked by guards. Her golden eyes were fixed on me, not the chaos. She didn't ask questions. She just watched, a silent pillar of green amidst the flashing red. Finally, with a series of sharp commands and a risky manual override that made the console spark, I brought the primary systems back online. The lights surged back to life, the klaxons fell silent. A collective sigh of relief went through the Viridian techs. But Lyra's gaze remained locked on me, a new respect dawning in her eyes. Later, in the quiet of her private study, a room filled with star charts and ancient data crystals. Not royal decrees. She confirmed it. The Dominion, she said, her voice tight. They couldn't attack openly, not yet. So they tried to make it look like an accident. To make you look incompetent. She placed a hand on my arm, her touch cool and grounding. You didn't just fix the power, Joran. You exposed their hand. The near disaster changed the dynamic. I was no longer just the consort. I was the Queen's engineer, her unexpected shield. We began working together in earnest, not just on palace systems but on strategy. I learned the intricate web of Viridian politics, the hidden alliances, the whispered threats. Lyra, in turn, listened with genuine interest as I explained Terran engineering principles, finding parallels in Viridian biotechnology that even her own scholars had missed. Our conversations, initially stiff and formal, began to flow easier, punctuated by moments of unexpected humor. My dry observations about courtly absurdities making her laugh, a sound like wind chimes in a desert storm, or her wry commentary on Terran bureaucracy leaving me chuckling. The connection forged in the ballroom, tested in the power nexus, was deepening into something real, something built on mutual respect and shared peril. One evening, reviewing security schematics, her white hair fell forward as she leaned over a holographic map. Without thinking, I reached out and gently tucked a strand behind her pointed ear. The contact was electric. We both froze, the air crackling with a tension that had nothing to do with palace politics. Her golden eyes searched mine, wide with surprise and something else, something warm and hesitant. The moment stretched, fragile and perfect, before the urgent chime of an incoming priority alert shattered it. But the look remained, a silent acknowledgement of the growing current between us. The Dominion's patience wore thin. Open aggression replaced covert sabotage. A fleet of sleek, obsidian warships, bearing the sigil of Prince Kaelin's Azure Dominion, emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Viridia's system, demanding the immediate annulment of the farcical union and the surrender of the Terran interloper. Diplomatic channels froze. War drums, silent for a generation, began to beat across the Concord. Inside the spire, the atmosphere turned glacial. Lord Theron and his allies openly questioned Lyra's sanity, whispering treason in every corridor. The pressure on Lyra was immense, visible in the new lines etching her face, the way her hand sometimes trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. But she never wavered. She stood before the Viridian High Council, her emerald armor gleaming, her white hair a banner of defiance. Viridia does not bow to ultimatums, she declared, her voice ringing with the authority of her ancestors. Our alliance, our future, is ours to choose, and we choose to stand with our consort. Her gaze found mine in the council chamber, a silent vow passing between us. We stand together. Preparing for war was a different kind of engineering challenge. Lyra's military advisors spoke of fleet formations and shield harmonics. I saw vulnerabilities in their supply chains, weaknesses in the Dominion's communication relays based on patterns I'd observed during the power sabotage. I proposed a counterstrike not with brute force, but with disruption, using modified atmospheric stabilizer tech to create localized gravity wells that could cripple Dominion engines, or hacking their comms using the same fluid dynamic principles that had saved the palace. Lyra listened, her strategic mind grasping the potential instantly. "You fight like an engineer," she said one night, watching me sketch modifications to a drone schematic. "You don't meet force with force. You find the flaw in the system." There was admiration in her voice, and something deeper, a warmth that made my chest tighten. The shared purpose, the constant proximity in the war room, the way her hand would sometimes brush mine as we pored over star charts. It was weaving a bond stronger than any political alliance. One evening, exhausted after a grueling strategy session, she leaned her head against my shoulder for just a moment, a gesture of pure, unguarded trust. The scent of night blooms and ozone filled my senses. In that quiet moment, amidst the looming threat of annihilation, The absurdity of the royal wedding program felt like a distant dream. The shared burden, the quiet understanding, the fierce protectiveness, this was real. The Dominion fleet advanced, a dark cloud blotting out the stars. Viridia's defenders scrambled, their silver ships forming a desperate shield. The first skirmishes were brutal, flashes of energy lighting the void. From the Spire's command center, Lyra directed the defense with cool precision, her voice steady even as reports of losses came in. I worked frantically at a secondary console, deploying my gravity well drones, watching their effects ripple through the Dominion formation on the tactical display. It was working, ships were dropping out of formation, engines flaring erratically. But it wasn't enough. The main Dominion dreadnought, Kaelin's flagship, powered through the disruptions, its weapons charging, its target clear. The celestial spire itself. Panic threatened to seize the command center. Lyra's face was pale, her knuckles white on the arm of her command chair, but her voice remained calm, issuing orders to concentrate fire. Yet, the dreadnought's shields were too strong. Despair began to creep in. Then I saw it. A flaw. Not in the dreadnought's shields, but in its power distribution, a legacy design flaw from an older Dominion model, masked by their newer tech but still present. It was a tiny vulnerability, a single conduit overloaded during sustained fire. My mind raced, connecting it to the atmospheric stabilizer schematics, to the principles of resonant frequency. Lyra! I yelled over the din, pointing at the display. The primary plasma conduit on their starboard nacelle. Its resonant frequency is 7.3 terahertz. If we can hit it with a focused pulse at exactly that frequency, even for a microsecond, it'll cascade through their entire power grid. It was a gamble, a shot in the dark based on half-remembered technical specs and intuition. Lyra didn't hesitate, her golden eyes locked onto mine, seeing not just the plan, but the man who saw the hidden flaw. "Do it!" she commanded, her voice ringing with absolute trust. "Reroute all auxiliary power to Joran's console. Give him control of the main defense array." My fingers flew across the console, bypassing safety protocols, calculating the precise harmonic resonance, syncing it with the firing solution from the Viridian gunners. Sweat poured down my face. The dreadnought loomed larger on the screen, its weapons glowing ominously. The entire command center held its breath. I fired. A single, focused beam of energy, invisible to the naked eye, lanced out from the spire's defenses. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, the dreadnought shuddered violently. Lights flickered across its hull. Its main weapon charge fizzled out. Alarms blared on the Dominion ship, visible even from this distance. The cascade had worked. The dreadnought was crippled, drifting helplessly. A ragged cheer erupted in the command center. Viridian ships swarmed the disabled flagship, forcing the rest of the Dominion fleet into a chaotic retreat. Silence fell in the command center, thick with the aftershock of victory and relief. The immediate threat was over. Lyra slowly rose from her command chair. She didn't look at the celebrating officers or the retreating enemy fleet on the screen. She walked straight to me, her emerald armor scuffed, her white hair escaping its braid, her golden eyes shimmering with unshed tears and something else, pure, unguarded awe. She stopped inches away, the scent of ozone and night blooms stronger than ever. The noise of the room faded away. She reached up, her cool, jade-tipped fingers gently brushing a smudge of grease from my cheek, a mark from the console I hadn't even noticed. Her touch sent a current through me, warmer than any energy weapon. "You did it, Joran," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved us." In that moment, surrounded by the echoes of battle and the quiet hum of the saved spire, the laughter I'd shared at the absurdity of the royal wedding felt like the first note in a much grander, more dangerous, and infinitely more meaningful symphony. The queen had chosen her husband, not for his title or his bloodline, but for the man who saw the flaw in the system and dared to fix it. And as her hand lingered on my face, the future, once a terrifying unknown, suddenly felt like a challenge we might just face together. The victory over the Dominion fleet didn't just repel an invasion. It shattered the illusion of Viridia's fragility. News of the crippled dreadnought and Prince Kaelin's humiliating retreat spread like solar wind across the Concord. Lord Theron and his faction, once so vocal in their disdain, fell silent, their influence crumbling like dry clay. The court, once a nest of vipers whispering treason, now watched Joran with wary respect, or outright admiration. He wasn't just the queen's consort anymore. He was the engineer who broke the dreadnought, the Terran who'd turned the tide with nothing but logic, courage, and a deep understanding of how things worked. But more importantly, something quieter, deeper, had taken root between Joran and Lyra. In the weeks that followed, the war room gave way to shared walks through the palace gardens, where bioluminescent flora pulsed gently under Viridia's twin moons. They talked, not just of strategy or statecraft, but of childhoods, dreams, and the strange beauty of each other's worlds. Joran told her about Earth's oceans and thunderstorms. Lyra spoke of the singing trees of the emerald canopy and the silent rituals of her ancestors. Laughter returned, not the nervous snort from the ballroom, but warm, easy chuckles that echoed in quiet chambers and sunlit courtyards. One evening, as they stood on the highest balcony of the celestial spire, watching the stars well overhead, Lyra turned to him. Her golden eyes held no regal distance now, only tenderness. "You laughed at my wedding," she said softly, a smile playing on her lips. "But you stayed, even when it meant standing in the storm with me." Joran met her gaze, his own heart full. "I didn't stay for the crown," he replied. "I stayed because the woman beneath it saw me, not as a technician, not as a pawn, but as someone worth trusting." He reached for her hand, his rough, human fingers intertwining with her cool, graceful ones. The connection felt inevitable, like two circuits finally completing a long-broken circuit. Months passed. The concord stabilized. Treaties were rewritten, not through coercion, but through mutual respect, with Viridia and the Terran coalition forging a new alliance built on innovation and shared values. Joran, no longer an outsider, helped modernize Viridia's infrastructure, blending Terran pragmatism with Viridian biotechnology in ways that made engineers across the galaxy take notice. Lyra ruled with renewed strength, her decisions guided not by tradition alone, but by wisdom tempered in fire, and by the quiet counsel of the man who stood beside her, not behind her. And then, on the first anniversary of the choosing, Lyra did something unprecedented. She called a gathering, not in the grand ballroom, but in the palace's ancient grove of vows, a sacred place where Viridian monarchs had pledged their lives to their people for millennia. The air hummed with anticipation as dignitaries, allies, and even former skeptics assembled beneath the luminous boughs. But this wasn't a political ceremony. Lyra stood at the center of the grove, not in emerald armor, but in robes of deep green and silver, her white hair braided with living moon vines. Beside her stood Joran, clean-shaven, wearing a tunic woven with threads of both Terran cotton and Viridian silk, a symbol of unity. Before the gathered crowd, Lyra took Joran's hands in hers and spoke not as a queen to her consort, but as one soul to another. "A year ago, I chose you before the galaxy," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But today I ask you, Joran of Terra, will you choose me? Not as your queen, but as your wife? To walk with me not just through duty, but through joy, through peace, through all the days we are given." Tears welled in Joran's eyes, not from fear, but from a happiness so profound it felt like coming home. He squeezed her hands. "I chose you the moment you looked at me in that ballroom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I just didn't know it yet." Cheers erupted, genuine, joyful, unburdened by politics. The grove of vows bloomed brighter, as if the trees themselves celebrated. That night, under a sky ablaze with stars and the gentle pulse of Viridia's auroras, Joran and Lyra were married. Not by decree, but by love. In the years that followed, they ruled not as monarch and consort, but as partners. Their union became legend, not for its drama, but for its quiet strength. They built schools where Terran and Viridian children learned side by side. They fostered peace not through treaties alone, but through shared invention and understanding. And in the heart of the celestial spire, in a sunlit chamber filled with star charts and half-finished schematics, they built a home. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Lyra would catch Joran smiling to himself. "What is it?" she'd ask, her head resting on his shoulder. And he'd laugh, that same warm, honest laugh from the ballroom long ago, and say, "Just thinking how lucky I am that you chose the guy who laughed at your wedding." And she'd smile back, her golden eyes glowing with love, and whisper, "I didn't just choose you, my love. I found you." And in that moment, surrounded by the hum of a thriving world and the quiet certainty of a love forged in chaos and tempered by trust, they knew, truly knew, that their story, once begun in absurdity, had found its perfect, happy ending.